Shabbat Shalom. What would you do? That's my question for you right now. What would you do? True story that actually happened. L.B. Sachs was a white Jewish lawyer who defended the rights of black people in the South African courts. His anti-apartheid activities led to months of incarceration in solitary confinement. Shortly after his release, an apartheid agent placed a bomb under L.B.'s car. It tore through L.B.'s body. After lengthy recovery, L.B. returned to a new South Africa, this time as a judge in the Constitutional Court. One day, someone booked an appointment to see him, and L.B. Sachs found himself standing face to face with the man who had attempted to kill him and caused the loss of one of L.B.'s arms and an eye. Now that man was seeking forgiveness from L.B. Sachs. What should he do? What would you do? Would you offer forgiveness? Or would you turn around, shut the door, and walk away? What would you do? L.B. responded that he would not shake the man's hand until he testified before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the body charged with hearing and recording the testimony of the villains of the apartheid era. Months later, at a chance meeting, the man told L.B. that he had confessed before the commission. L.B. shook his hand. There would be no trial and no punishment. Forgiveness took the place of justice. As a victim, L.B.'s priority was that the perpetrators of brutal crimes acknowledge their guilt so that the country could let go of its brutal racist past and move forward peacefully. It was a generous gesture for sure, but was it the right thing to do? What would you have done? Would you have been able to forgive? We read this week Parashat Tetzei, and as I mentioned throughout the service, it is really a corollary to last week's Torah portion of Parashat Shoftim. As Moshe Rabbeinu, as Moses, our teacher, sought not only to develop Jews who had a relationship with God, and not only a community that was righteous in its religious behavior, but Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, sought to build a society based on justice, tempered with compassion. He sought to build a world in which justice and compassion went hand in hand. Case in point, this week's Torah portion, I'm Deuteronomy chapter 25. You're welcome to follow along with me. I'm on page 1132 in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, page 1132. Moses teaches, when there's a dispute between two people and they go to the judge, they go to court, and a decision is rendered declaring the one in the right and the other in the wrong. If the guilty one is to be flogged, the magistrate shall have the guilty one lie down and be given lashes in the presence of the victim, by count, as his guilt warrants. Torah adds, he may be given up to 40 lashes, but not more, lest being flogged further to excess, your brother be degraded before your eyes. Right? He can give up to 40 lashes, but not more, because at that point, it becomes not a matter of punishment, but of degradation. And in fact, the Talmud will actually go on to declare that anyone who gives more than 39 lashes is actually in violation of the law, because one might lose track of the count, right, and thus exceed the number of lashes and become a sinner in his own right. We have here this balance between justice, the need for justice to be served, and compassion, that compassion has to be carried out always. So here we are now in the month of Elul. We are just a couple weeks away from Rosh Hashanah. We are in the season of forgiveness, of asking to be forgiven, and in offering forgiveness. The great Moses Maimonides, 1,000 years ago, the codifier of Jewish law, he wrote in his Mishnah Torah that sins between a person and his fellow, such as striking, cursing, or robbing, are never forgiven until one pays up his debt and appeases his fellow. Two steps. One pays off his debt and appeases his fellow. Even if the perpetrator returns the money, the Rambam writes, he still must ask for forgiveness. Even if he only spoke badly about the other person, the perpetrator must appease and beseech the victim until he's forgiven. If his fellow refuses to forgive him, then the perpetrator must bring a group of 3 friends, probably 3 friends of the victim, and go to the victim, and the perpetrator must ask the victim for forgiveness. Could you imagine every time someone said something ill about another person, they actually went and apologized, right? Imagine that, right? And then brought friends to stand up and support. But if the victim still does not forgive the perpetrator, Rambam writes, the perpetrator must go to the victim a second time and a third time to ask for forgiveness. Right? That's how important seeking forgiveness is in Judaism. Right? For whatever wrongs we've done, little or big, we have to not only recompense the crime we've committed, but we have to seek forgiveness as well. Now, here we go. There's a little asterisk to that. However, if the victim still refuses to give the perpetrator forgiveness, the perpetrator may cease asking forgiveness, and the victim, now becomes the sinner. One who fails to grant forgiveness to another who's asking to be forgiven becomes the sinner. If the injured party is his teacher, his Rabbi, he must go to him even 1,000 times until he is forgiven. Rambam adds, it is forbidden to be cruel and difficult to appease. Rather, a person must be quick to forgive and difficult to anger. And when the sinner asks for forgiveness, he should forgive him willingly and wholeheartedly. That's what L.B. Sachs did. The man asked for forgiveness. L.B. said, on one condition, you have to speak your truth publicly. The man did that, and L.B. shook his hand and forgave him. Would you be strong enough? Now, I'm often asked at this time of the year, Rabbi, it's fine. We understand that if someone asks me for forgiveness, I'm supposed to be compassionate and grant forgiveness to the one who's wronged me. But what if the person who wronged me doesn't ask for forgiveness? What if he or she hasn't admitted his crimes or his wrong? Now, I know that happens from time to time in our society. Every now and again, I'll meet someone who's a little bit stubborn and not quite willing to admit when they've done something wrong. Should we forgive that person? And so my answer to that question really comes in the form of the traditional prayer that's supposed to be recited on Kol Nidre right before Yom Kippur begins. And here's how the prayer reads. I extend complete forgiveness to everyone who has sinned against me, whether physically or monetarily, or spoke lashon hara, evil speech about me, or even given false reports. And also for any damages, whether on my body or my property, and all sins between a person and his fellow, except for money which I can claim in a court of law, and except for someone who sins against me, saying, I will sin against him and he'll forgive me. Except for these, I grant complete forgiveness, and no person should be punished on my account. And just as I forgive everyone, so God should you grant me favor in the eyes of all people, that they should completely forgive me. The prayer standing one-on-one before our Creator on the day of judgment says, God, I want you to forgive me, even though I'm not totally worthy of forgiveness. And so because, God, I want you to forgive me, I'm going to forgive everyone who has wronged me. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, sought to build a society based not just on justice, but on compassion as well. And if we come back to our text in the Torah this week, we actually see it. Because it says in the Hebrew originally, the person who has committed the crime is considered the Rasha, the evildoer. But then a couple psukim, a couple of verses later, after the punishment has taken place, no longer is the perpetrator considered or called a Rasha in the Hebrew. Rather, he's called Achicha, your brother, your sister, your sibling. The moment we've granted forgiveness, we're no longer to hold a grudge. And with that in mind, I'm reminded of the words, I believe it was Ann Landers who teaches, hanging on to resentment is like letting someone you despise live rent-free in your head. Hanging on to resentment is like letting someone you despise live rent-free in your head. This is the season, my friends, of forgiveness. If we've wronged another, we should actively and consciously seek forgiveness from that person, admitting our wrongs, accepting whatever punishment should come. But when others have wronged us, if they're asking forgiveness from us, we should grant it quickly and compassionately and forgive fully. But even if those who have wronged us are not asking for forgiveness, we ourselves are better off by granting forgiveness nevertheless. And in that way, we hope that God should grant us the unmerited forgiveness that we so desperately need as we come into this new year. And so I'll remind you, as Moses Maimonides teaches in the Mishnah Torah, the Day of Atonement atones for sins against God, but the Day of Atonement does not atone for sins between a person and another person until they've sought forgiveness from the one they've wronged. As we continue through the month of Elul, may we be strong enough to ask for forgiveness from those whom we've wronged, especially those closest to us, parents, children, spouses, siblings. And may we also be wise enough and compassionate enough to forgive as well. Shabbat Shalom.